What's up, Legend? Welcome back to my Unmatched Strategy Guide series. Today we are going to be taking a look at one of the newest characters in the Unmatched cinematic universe, Little Red Riding Hood. I know this video is late. Read the description before you leave a nasty comment, and let's just get right into it. Let's talk about her stats. Little Red is a melee character with 14 health. Her sidekick, the Huntsman, is a ranged character with 9 health, and they have a movement value of 2. To start, Little Red has access to a handful of movement schemes that let her move around the board very efficiently, so her mobility isn't really that much of an issue. However, she does have 14 health, which is slightly below average for a single hero, and on top of this, a lot of her defense cards are only a printed value of 2, but both of these defensive deficiencies are made up for by the fact that Little Red has some of the best healing in the game. So her two biggest apparent visible flaws of low health and low movement aren't really that much of an issue. The Huntsman, on the other hand, is the top of his class for his health category because 9 health is the most a single sidekick currently at this point in time can have. He's also a ranged character, which helps because only like a third of hero sidekick teams in this game have ranged characters, so that's always an advantage. However, he does have a card that almost makes him a melee character. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But their health pool in total is the 5th highest in the game at 23 total health points. And if you factor in the healing that I mentioned earlier, it's actually a lot higher than that, kind of. Her deck composition has 12 unique cards, which is certainly on the lower end of the spectrum. However, because of her ability, the consistency is variable, and how efficiently she can actually use her cards is often determined by the order in which she draws cards from her deck. So in order to further understand what that sentiment means, let's take a look at her ability. It says, resolve an effect on a card you play if the symbol next to the effect matches the item in your basket. At the start of the game, place Little Red's basket in your discard pile. If you have not played with this set or played as Little Red before, you'll probably have no idea what I'm talking about. As I've mentioned before, this video is probably going to be very long because Little Red is one of the most complicated heroes in the game, if not the most, and I'll probably spend a lot of time flapping my lips trying to convey information to you. After this video goes up, I'm going to make a separate, much shorter video specifically on Little Red's ability that will kind of illustrate the rules a little bit better and just throw in some extra neat information if you care about that at all. So I recommend watching that video because I don't want to waste more time explaining this here. Most cards on them, not all of the cards in your deck, will have an additional ability or effect that can only trigger if it's matched to a certain symbol. All the cards in their banner on the left where it says which character can use that card, below that, it'll have a symbol on it, and there are 3 different symbols. There's basically a circle, a triangle, and a square, except it's a knife, wolfsbane, and a pelt, technically speaking. And the effect with the symbol next to it will trigger if on the card you're playing, that symbol is also on the top card of your discard pile. Crazy, I know. At the start of the game, you add this card, Little Red's basket, into your discard pile, and it has all 3 symbols on them. So the first card you play that has a triggerable effect, triggerable, is that a word? That has a symbol effect will always trigger. So that's just like a nice little momentum boost for the beginning of the game. Most cards are above average when they get this effect triggered, and they are below average when they do not get the effect triggered. So you want to trigger as many of these effects as you can, but don't fall into the trap of trying to trigger every single symbol, because a lot of times the way you draw your cards, you just might not have the correct order or combination of symbols in order to do that. However, if you can actually efficiently match symbols correctly, you will get a big boost in the value you're getting from your cards. However, because these are all effects on cards, they are susceptible to feint and feint type cards that cancel effects. So keep that in mind if you're going against a character like Bigfoot that has 5, not technically, but 5 feint-like cards. Boosting your maneuvers is a great way to ensure that the correct symbol you want is on top of your discard pile, because when you boost a maneuver, you discard a card, add its boost value to your move value, and you can move up to that many spaces. However, you're ensuring that whatever card you just discarded has a symbol on it that hopefully you can utilize on the next card you play. So that's just a cool way to guarantee the fact that you want an effect to trigger. So let's take a look at some of her cards. The first one being, What's That in My Basket? This is a little red only 4-value versatile card with all 3 symbols on it, a boost value of 3, and you have 4 copies of this. So this is your basket symbol reset. This is a wild symbol, so the next card you play will always have its effect triggered, which is great. I see this card as being used in one of 2 ways. You can either play this on defense to make sure that your next attack will have its symbol effect triggered, or you can play this on offense as an attack to then set up your defense cards for their symbols to get triggered. On defense, if you're using this to block, it is the most consistent high-value block card you have in your deck. You have a handful of 4-value cards you can block with, but this is the one you can use the most consistently. You'll understand why when we talk about the other card a little bit later. And it's always good to block 4 points of damage, because that's kind of a lot of damage, and you only have 14 hit points. I prefer using this on offense, however, because you have a lot of other designated defense cards that are all pretty low in value, but have very good, very powerful effects that you want to trigger. So when you use this card on offense, it'll make sure that when you're playing your block cards with the powerful effects, that you get them to trigger. However, keep in mind that sometimes you'll just draw a bunch of cards and maybe they'll all have a pelt symbol on them, and you really need a knife symbol to trigger. So you can just play this card when it's convenient to make sure that you have a knife symbol to trigger next. So you don't really have to force yourself to use this specifically on offense this game, or specifically, I'm going to use all my basket cards on defense this game. Just use it whenever you want to change whatever symbol is on top of your discard pile, or whenever you need a specific symbol in an upcoming turn. It's just a very flexible card, and you have 4 copies of it, so I wouldn't really hang on to it for that long waiting for the perfect play. I would just use it to get a nice advantage on your next turn. This next card is called What Big Ears You Have. It is a little red only 4-value attack with the pelt symbol on it. It has a boost value of 2, and you have 2 copies of it. And the effect is, if matched with a knife symbol, you may play this card as a defense card. So just like with What's in My Basket, this is basically a 4-value card with no specific effect on it that happens like during or after combat. It's just a 4-value attack, whereas with What's in My Basket, you could also block with it, except you can also block with this card. So they're very similar in that regard, but the main premise of this card is that it's a decent attack. 4-value attacks are just pretty good, but the effect is that it gives you an additional 4-value card to block with, and blocking 4 damage points is pretty good. The other defense cards in your deck have low value with actual powerful effects, so this is kind of like a counterweight to that. It's a high value defense card with no effect. It's incredibly situational for you to actually use this on defense, because only about a third of the cards in your deck actually have the knife symbol on it, so I wouldn't count on being able to play this on defense every single time you draw it, but the flexibility, although slightly limited, still is there, and 4-value on defense is pretty good. It's also amazing the first time you block with this card, your opponent sees the color red in the banner, and they're like, what are you doing? You can't play that card on defense. And then you go, read the text, bud, and then they're just like, ugh, and you laugh at them. That's always fun. This next card is called What a Terrible Big Mouth You Have. It is a little red only 2-value block card with the knife symbol on it. It has a boost value of 2, and you have 2 copies of this card. And it says, pelt symbol, after combat, deal damage to the opposing fighter equal to the printed value of this card. So before we start talking about the effect, let's talk about the value of this card and what it means if you use this card without getting the basket symbol effect to trigger. I'd like to think of it as gas station sushi, because it's only blocking 2 points of damage, which isn't actually that much. In the moment, it might seem fine, but maybe later down the road, you might regret it, as you wish you had 1 or 2 more hit points and maybe played a 4-value block card that we just talked about instead to preserve a little bit more health. So 2 value block is good-ish. I'm hesitant to say it's good. It's definitely not doing a lot. I talk about how bad it is to block with regroup. This is just one more point of damage you're blocking added onto a regroup, which still isn't that great. However, the reason why the value is so low is because the effect is really great, and it's superb against high printed value attack cards. Let's say King Arthur attacks you with Excalibur, and you play this card and trigger the effect. You take 4 damage from the attack. King Arthur takes 6. That's just unfair. However, at the same time, it's a lot less great against effect-generated damage. Say, Sinbad's Voyages. He plays his 5th voyage. Its printed value is 2, so he only takes 2 damage, but the actual damage he's dealing with his card is 6. So in that scenario, you're still taking the same amount of damage, 4, but you're dealing 4 less to the character. So obviously, matchup depending, this card is either really good or still okay. Against something like Bigfoot, who just has a ton of 4s and a handful of 6s, you're going to do a lot of damage to him with this card. It's a shame you only have 2 copies of it because you can deal a lot of damage with this. But again, it is opponent dependent. A theme that Little Red has with her cards is that she's really good at just dealing additional damage through effects and not necessarily her values, which I guess makes sense because her ability is so effect-oriented. You can also surprise opponents with this because this is a black card. You'll be playing it when your opponent attacks you on their turn. You'll be dealing damage to them unexpectedly because they won't necessarily expect to take damage and lose health on their turn. So just kind of interesting. This is a pretty powerful card, but it's very situational, and you really want to play it when you have a pelt card in your basket. The next card is called What Big Eyes You Have. It is a Little Red only, versatile 3 value card with a pelt symbol. The boost value is 2, and you have 2 copies of it. It says, immediately cancel all effects on your opponent's card with the Wolfsbane symbol. Also ignore the value of your opponent's card. So this is basically just Feint. Fun fact, Little Red doesn't have any basic cards in her deck, including Feint. So this is basically the replacement for that. Except this is just a little bit better than Feint by itself because the value is 3 and not 2. And it does more than just cancel the effect. So this card is perfectly fine to play without matching the Wolfsbane symbol to something in your basket. It's very similar to the Bigfoot card. It's just your imagination, which is a designated defense 3 value Feint, essentially. The basket ability, however, makes it absolutely nuts because if you play this on defense, your immediately ability, or effect I should say, will trigger before the attackers, which means you'll cancel all the effects on their card and the value on their card if you match the symbol, which means they basically, their attack does absolutely nothing. It's a 0 value attack with no effect, which is awesome. It blocks absolutely. It's a better version of the Invisible Man card, Impossible to See, which just cancels the value of your opponent's card, but not the effect. So this is just a really strong defense card because it basically just says no to your whatever your opponent plays. However, you can also play this on offense to try to get 3 free damage in, except if your opponent plays an immediately card, it will happen before yours happens, and the most common immediately card in the game is Feint, which would cancel the ignore the value of your opponent's card effect on this card. However, in a pinch, if your opponent's not expecting it, you could sneak this in and deal 3 free damage just ignoring their defense card. So this is a very powerful card, and again, based on your opponent's deck, if they have a lot of effect-based attacks, you might want to save this on defense. I wouldn't really try to use it on offense because you have a lot better attacks to actually use. It's just a very strong defensive card for your deck. The next card is called Into the Woods. It is a Little Red only scheme with a boost value of 2, and you have 3 copies of it. Something interesting to note, each copy has a different symbol on it. So there's one pelt, which is the one on the screen right now. There's one version of this card with a knife and one version of this card with a wolfbane. So it will be different every time you draw it. So just double check and make sure you know what symbol's on the card. Don't assume that they all have the same symbol of the first one you draw. Moving 3 spaces as a move 2 character is great. The fact that you also get an action after you move is also great. That just lets you do more things on your turn. I love cards that give you more actions. That's why Bruce Lee is one of my favorite fighters. It just lets you chain together cards and combos and whatnot. It's absolutely madness. In my opinion, the version of this card with the knife symbol on it is the most helpful because you get to play this card first, move 3 spaces, close the gap between you and your opponent, attack with the knife symbol, which is often the symbol that triggers effects on your attack cards, and then possibly attack again or maneuver away. I just think that's a very strong setup. However, the other two are still probably good because you can use this to close the gap, then play something like What's in Your Basket, and then just play a knife thing anyways. But in my opinion, the pelt is probably the least useful because that is used on a lot of defensive cards to trigger those effects. So you could just use this to move away from an opponent if you started your turn right next to them and just maneuver twice to draw more cards. But just very situational. You can do a lot of things with this card based on the specific symbol on it. So that's probably the most important thing, is just make sure you know what symbol's on it. The next card is Never Leave the Path. It's another little red only scheme. However, this one is always a wolf pelt symbol on it. You have a boost value of 1 and you have 2 copies of this card. There's 3 effects on this card. There's a different one for each symbol. The pelt symbol says place little red in any space, gain 1 action. The knife symbol says deal 2 damage to each opposing fighter in little red zone. And the wolfsbane symbol says draw 3 cards. So you will always be able to use this scheme no matter what card is on top of your discard pile, because you can always use one of the 3 effects. It might not be the one you want to play, but you will always be able to use this card. The wild symbol, if you have What's in My Basket on top of your discard pile, does not mean you get all 3 effects. You get to pick one, and it's because it's the wild symbol, you get to choose. This is a absolute playmaker of a card with really great design. Cards that have choices on them, like Looking Glass in Alice's deck, for example, are just really good design because it gives skilled players more options and they can be very clever with which options they choose. And this card has 3 very powerful options on them. It's kind of like borrowing effects from other cards. The pelt effect is very similar to Mistform from Dracula's deck. The knife effect is very similar to Pure Evil from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the wolfsbane symbol is reminiscent of Riches Beyond Compare from our old friend Sinbad, which those are all very powerful cards in each of their decks. And you have the choice of all 3 on this one card in your deck. The pelt effect is very useful as a move 2 character again. This lets you teleport around the map wherever you want, and you get to gain another action, which just lets you do more combos, just like how we talked about with, very similar to Into the Woods, so I'm not really going to get too much into that, except this is obviously better because instead of just moving 3 spaces, you can teleport. The pelt symbol, again, isn't really useful for setting up attacks, though. The area of effect of 2 damage to each opposing fighter in little red zone is very helpful, especially against heroes with sidekicks, and especially when they have multiple sidekicks that have 1 health, because this would obviously just kill them. You have to remember, this affects the entire zone, not just the spaces that little red might be adjacent to. That also means if there's a fighter adjacent to you in a different zone, you won't actually hit them. So just your positioning, just be extra careful about that and double check what you're actually hitting. I would use this effect if you're hitting at least 2 targets, because just dealing 2 damage to 1 target is like Momentary Glance from Medusa's deck, and you can do so much better than that. So punish your opponent for making a positioning mistake if they know you have this card, and deal at least 4 damage to multiple targets. The drawing 3 cards is obviously excellent. You have another card that you'll probably use more often to draw cards, and I would rather get the area of effect damage from the knife symbol than I would have to use this card to draw 3 cards. And it's very useful if you just have a low hand size, you want to draw more cards, have more options. That's basically it with this card. 3 very powerful effects. The only downside is you only have 2 copies of it. So it's very flexible. Use it in whatever situation will give you the most benefit. Now let's talk about Little Red's sidekick, the Huntsman. The Huntsman is actually probably one of the most useful sidekicks in the game. It's up there with Merlin, I think, and I'd like to know your opinion on that in the comments down below if you've played with this set before. The Huntsman, again, has 9 health, which is great, but it's mostly because all of your defensive options are 2 valued cards, so you can't actually take that many hits despite his high health value, and you will want to keep him alive. I highly recommend that because he is the one who heals Little Red. So if he dies very early, you will lose access to a lot of healing that will potentially keep you alive for longer and help you win the game, which is why I prefer to attack with Little Red early in the game so that she takes all the hits and absorbs all the damage, and you can just use the Huntsman later in the game to heal her back up. However, the Huntsman does have some aggressive cards that make it so that if you go, that rewards you for going all in the early game. You can probably actually maybe kill your opponent before you even need to heal. So those are just kind of like 2 different strategic play styles that I think are very interesting with this character. Of course, you can do a hybrid of each, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's talk about his cards now. The first card is called Long Have I Sought You, which I think is just a really interesting card name. It's a Huntsman only attack of 4 value. It has the knife symbol on it, and the boost value is 2, and you have 3 copies of this card. It says, during combat, if the Huntsman is adjacent to the opposing fighter, the value of this card is 6 instead. So the Huntsman is a ranged character, so if you use this as a ranged attack, it's just a 4 value attack with no text on it. However, if you get right up into your enemy's business and you're adjacent to the opposing fighter, it's a 6 with no text, unless it gets canceled, and then it's back down to a 4. So a ranged attack of 4 with no text is just good. It's just like Big Ears, but this card is better than Big Ears. 6 value attacks are excellent. They gave 1 to King Arthur and said, hey, you've got all the tools you need now. And then they gave 3 to Bigfoot, and King Arthur started crying. But that's a rant for a different game. However, it is predictable because whenever you attack with the Huntsman and you're right next to the enemy, they'll know that you could potentially be hitting them for 6, whereas if you attack them from range, they have nothing to worry about. So they might save their good block cards or their cancel effects for when you are closer to them. And it also encourages the Huntsman to be vulnerable because you could just stay at a range and attack your enemies from afar, or you could get real up close to them for more damage, but the Huntsman might be more vulnerable to enemy attacks and taking damage because of that. And the block cards, as I mentioned for the Huntsman, are quite poor on the value end, so you might actually die if you use this card too aggressively in the early game. But again, the damage that you get from this card might make up for that fact by just ending the game sooner. The duality of man right here. You can also potentially bait your opponents into playing good block cards or cancel effects by moving the Huntsman close to them and just playing a different attack. So they say, oh no, I'm about to take 6 damage. I need to play my best block card. Oh, they just played a 2 value card. Rats. So there's so many mind games with this card. So much strategic potential that is just, I really appreciate. The next card is a Grimm Tale. This is the card I've been hyping up this whole video. It is a Huntsman only scheme with the Wolfsbane symbol on it. A boost value of 3, and you have 2 copies of it. And it says, Little Red recovers 2 health, but with the pelt symbol, Little Red recovers 4 health instead. This is an excellent source of healing. It's a very efficient card. 4 health on 1 card is just insane. I don't think there's a better healing card in the game so far. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So 8 health over 2 cards is absolutely insane. If you only play it for the 2 health because you can't match the symbols, that's a lot less good, but sometimes you might have to use that. For instance, if Little Red is about to die, it doesn't matter if it's 2 health or 4 health, you got to give her more health so that you don't lose right away. Also, if the Huntsman's about to die, you can say, oh, I'm just going to use this card less efficiently, but I might not get to use it if I wait another turn because they might just kill the Huntsman. So you can just use it and recover all the health you can now so that it's not just a useless card later in the game. Also, if the enemy has a lot of discard effects, like Alice's Snicker Snack, for example, which they can force you to discard any card they want, or you're playing against someone like Sherlock Holmes, which is just annoying, you might want to get this card out of your hand ASAP as possible so that you get the healing and you don't lose access to it later in the game. This is just a really solid card. It makes Little Red really hard to kill because you potentially add 8, and as we'll see later, potentially even more than that health onto her max health. If you use this card twice, it's almost like Little Red had 22 max health instead of 14. And 22 is a lot of health to get through for a single hero. It's just insane. So honestly, might just be the best card in the entire deck. Let's talk about the any cards now. The first one is the Wolf's Skin. It is a 2-value defense-only attack with the knife symbol, a boost value of 2, and you have 3 copies of it. And the effect is pelt symbol. After combat, draw 2 cards. So again, this is like gas station sushi, like the what a terrible big mouth you have card. So I won't really get into the value of it if you're blocking without the effect. But this is an effect you really, really want because this is the primary card draw tool for your deck. This card is very reminiscent of cards like Little Dragon from Bruce Lee and Looking Glass from Alice's deck, which are both 2-value block cards that draw 2 cards, except Little Dragon is a versatile card, and sometimes you can play it as a value 6, and Looking Glass will also heal you for 3 health instead of just only drawing 2 cards. So both of those cards are better than this card, which might not even draw you any cards at all, but 2-value cards that draw 2 cards, we've seen them before, and they're pretty good in those decks. So this card is also pretty good when you get to draw 2 cards. I really like activating this card whenever I can because that means I don't have to draw cards from Never Leave the Path, which means I can use the area of effect damage from that card, and that's just a better proposition for me. This card is good. It's not great because it's only 2, but it's a very good source of drawing cards. Sorry, my furnace turned on and kind of messed up the audio for that last bit, but regardless, we must push on. The next card we're going to talk about is Stones in the Belly, an any versatile 2 card with the Wolfsbane symbol, a boost value of 1, and 3 copies. And it says, knife symbol. During combat, your opponent discards 1 random card. Add its boost value to this card's value. This is Ambush's little brother. This is word for word the same effect as Ambush, which is a card that shows up in like Dracula, Robin Hood, and the Raptors decks. Maybe more. It's just a different card, obviously, because it has the Wolfsbane symbol on it and the knife symbol as a requirement for it. Ambush is an attack only, whereas this is a versatile only. So this is better, but the effect doesn't always happen, so maybe it's not better. Similar power level. There are a plethora of designated attacks or designated block cards, the reds and the blues, the non-versatiles. So this card is very flexible. I like to use this card to fill out my hand. If I have a bunch of block cards that I can't attack with, I'll use this card to attack, and vice versa if I have a bunch of attacks in my hand. The final value that this card will take, assuming you get the effect to trigger, will probably be around 4, but some of your opponents might have a higher average boost value in their deck, and some will have lower, but I think 4 is a pretty good estimate. So if you're attacking for 4, that's pretty good, but they're also discarding a card in the process, so it's better than just a 4-value attack with no text. But on defense, the effect is probably better because just like in the Medusa video, when you get your opponent to discard a card when it's their turn, they have less time to react to them losing a card, and maybe that random card was the block card they were planning on using when you attack them, and now they're down a card and have to use some other less good option. So that's like the best case scenario, but you have 3 copies of it, so it's going to be annoying for your opponent to deal with. I think the very next card I'm going to talk about is probably a little bit better to attack with, so I'm going to recommend probably using this on defense more often than not. Just a pretty solid card with an annoying effect. The next card is called Once Upon a Time. This is another any versatile 2-value card with the Wolfsbane symbol, a boost value of 1, and you only have 2 copies of this, and it says knife symbol. After combat, deal 3 damage to the opposing fighter. So this card might not seem like it's very, very good at first because it's only a 2-value card. Doesn't really deal that much damage by itself as an attack. Doesn't really block that much damage. But the effect is excellent. Think about when you're attacking an opponent with a high-value card, like you attack them with a 5 and they block with a 4. You only deal 1 damage. Now think about when you attack with this card. They block with a 4. You don't deal any damage, but then the after a combat effect kicks in and you deal 3 damage to them. It's almost like you attack them with a 7-value attack. Now, that isn't necessarily an accurate representation of what this attack is. But if you trigger the effect and it doesn't get canceled, it's almost like you're playing a card that has whatever value card your opponent plays with 3 added to it, which when you think about it, is just really, really good. This card is very similar to Counterpunch from Sherlock Holmes deck, except this deals 3 damage after combat instead of 2. And the effect is just really, really good. If you use this as an attack, if it gets canceled, yeah, that sucks, but you have some other effects that are pretty nasty. So they really want to cancel everything, so you can't really get mad that this gets canceled. But just dealing 3 damage is just really good. Like, if you dealt 3 damage every time you attacked your opponent, they die super quickly. So this card's effect might not seem like it's very good to you. Or maybe it does, because you can see that 3 damage is actually a lot of damage. That's like a fifth of your opponent's health, probably. So it's just really good. You can use this on defense, but the 2-value block isn't great. The effect will surprise your opponent, but I think it's just better used as an attack because you have cards like Stones in the Belly and so many designated blues that you can use to block with. So this is a very good card for dealing damage and just knocking your opponent's health down. 3 damage is a lot. And the last card in Little Red's deck is called What Large Hands You Have. It is for Little Red only, and it's an attack with a value 2. It has the pelt symbol, a boost value of 3, and you have 2 copies of it. So normally I do the character-specific cards all at once, then do the sidekick cards, then do the any cards. So this card is very out of place, but there's a reason for that. It's because I needed to do it last. The effect is, after combat, you may return this card to your hand. The Wolfsbane symbol says, instead, you may return the top card of your discard pile to your hand. So this means that all the cards that have the Wolfsbane symbol in the banner, you can potentially play more times than you have copies of. We'll get to those specific cards in a second. But this is the first card effect like this in the game, I'm pretty sure. You could theoretically play this infinitely many times. You could just play it and then return it to your hand. Then the very next turn, play it again. And your opponent kind of just gets forced to either block, but it's only 2 damage, so blocking kind of feels not as good. They can cancel it to stop the loop. You do have 2 copies of this, though. Or they just don't block because they know you're attacking with an attack that's only 2 damage. And that's not that much in the long run. But you just have access to this over and over and over again. Now, I've only played red a couple of times, and I haven't aggressively tried to spam this attack as many times as I possibly can. But I think it might be a viable strategy, and I'd love to know your opinions or experiences using this card like this. The value itself on the attack isn't great at all. A 2-value attack is laughable. But it does waste an opponent's block. And if they don't block, it's like 2 free damage. It reminds me loosely of 1-Inch Punch from Bruce Lee's deck and Highway Robbery from Robin Hood's deck. Highway Robbery, of course, is the sidekick card for Robin Hood, where it deals 2 damage and it ignores the value on your opponent's card, which basically means it's just 2 free damage as an attack. So oftentimes when the Outlaws, Robin Hood's sidekick, attack, you just go, oh boy, they're playing that card, and you just don't block because you know that whatever you play, it's just going to get canceled anyway. This card kind of reminds me of that, but obviously it's not the same. And it's like 1-Inch Punch because Bruce Lee has a scheme called 1-Inch Punch that just deals 2 damage to a fighter next to him. And if it defeats that fighter, he gets to add the card back to his hand. So it's really good at just chewing down 1-health sidekicks, which you could do with this card. Not the same because 2 damage in a scheme is better than a 2 damage attack, but you could potentially make them waste cards trying to protect their weaker characters. Let's talk about the actual basket trigger effect, which you return a card with the Wolfsbane symbol from your discard pile on top of your discard pile, specifically to your hand. The cards with this symbol on them include Into the Woods, which is the scheme that lets you move 3 spaces and then gain an action. But you only have 1 copy of that, and I don't really think that card is worth bringing back necessarily because you do have 3 copies of it. Stones in the Belly, which is the ambush-like card we talked about pretty recently. If you bring that card back, you make your opponent discard more cards. That's pretty good. You could bring back Once Upon a Time, which you only have 2 copies of, and that's the versatile 2-value attack that deals 3 damage after combat. That could be a great way to close out the game and just deal more and more damage to your opponent if they don't have any cancel effects left. You can bring back a Grimm Tale, which is the Huntsman healing card, and potentially heal red more than 8 health, which I think is just insane. If you bring back that card twice, you could heal red for 16 health points, which is more than her max health was to begin with. You would give her, well, like not really, but you would basically give her 30 max HP, which is
absolutely insane.
And I think it's really worth it to bring back that card because you can just keep on healing red and just make your opponent have to chew through even more health. It's just very annoying. And you can also bring back What's That in My Basket, which is the wild card, because of course it has all 3 symbols on it, which of course includes the Wolfsbane symbol on it. And that's just a pretty solid card, and it gives you access to all 3 symbols at once to potentially activate another card that you have in your hand. So I really like those last 2 options, but really you can't go wrong with any of the other cards. I think this is a very unique card, and it is insidiously powerful in this deck. Little Red does not have any basic cards, so we're just going to go right into the final thoughts. I'm not sure exactly how apparent this is, but I really, really like Little Red. She's probably my 2nd favorite fighter in all of Unmatched because, let's be honest, no one can beat Bruce Lee. And she just has so many things going for her. Her ability, while complicated, is super rewarding to play, and while it requires 15 times more thinking than the next most complicated character, it's just so much fun while you're doing it. And it's not actually that hard to understand once you start playing. She provides a lot of interesting choices, like how you use the Huntsman, what option do you choose on Never Leave the Path, and how efficiently you want to use your card effects. Do you block with a card now, even though you won't get the effect, or do you just take the damage and hang on to the card and try to make use of the effect later? Situations like that will happen all the times in your games, and you'll be forced to make meaningful decisions, which is a great showcase of how Restoration Games and Mondo designed this character. She is half of a phenomenal set. I have positive things to say about Beowulf too. And if you are on the fence about buying this set, just buy it. If you have played Unmatched at all, these are 2 of the best characters they've ever made. Even though I'm supposed to be talking about Little Red right now, Beowulf is also very neat and very handsome. He has the hair I wish I had. But Little Red, great character, awesome ability, unique mechanics, just so much fun to play. Thank you so much for watching. This has been quite the long video. That just happens because I like to talk and there's a lot to talk about with Little Red. Stay tuned for Beowulf's video, which hopefully will be up by the end of February. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and yeet!